This is the infamous changing model of the church and best practices team. And we'll very quickly run through some background, kind of the process that this team of people ran through over the last many months, starting last July. Each of us is going to share some important outreach stories, that we have from people, from around the Episcopal Church and other churches that we talk with. We'll summarize that in some key findings, and then from the key findings, we'll also circle back to a variety of our team members here and talk about the synthesis and recommendation process that we went through with Ed and provide some of those recommendations. And then a very brief, I'll come back, wrap it up with a very brief roadmap for pulling all that together. Trula Worthy-Clayton also worked with us on this team, as well as Greg Adams co-chaired with me through September, at which point his work world got a little intense. And he did a ton of work over the summer pulling things together, and then I carried it from there. And so Ed invited us to do this. One of the key priorities is around relational community and creating a connectedness, an authentic connectedness, among people. So, background. This really came about through a conversation, among the rector, the Vestry staff members, the growth committee. And Ed was stealing this idea of let's reach out and see what are those best practices. What things are people having success with? What are our church members connecting with staff members about? And what ministries do we need to be thinking about transforming in some ways? And then how does that go from changing around the edges to a fundamental transformation of how we're doing church in that model? Ed pulled together a vision. What we've called the charter for this work. Everybody should have received that in the pre-read documents. And so it wasn't like we had some guidance, and so really some ideas starting. I wouldn't call it guidance. I think that's probably a better way to characterize it. And then we also, were free and did add to that scope. Ed, we've pulled everybody together who's here, as well as the folks who I described. And really, from very early on, this idea of member engagement and increasing this connectedness among people in a very real and authentic way was a theme that powerfully emerged, this concept of relational community and authentic connectedness. So the process, Ed did an initial orientation, with our team, I think the first week of July. From that, we developed a work plan, and really the key thing was, okay, if we're going to talk to a whole bunch of people, as you saw on that charter, what are we going to talk to them about? What are things we're curious about? I think in these kinds of processes, being open to some of the hard questions that you want to ask is really a critical part, and I really encourage everybody to be as open as possible as we talk through this. I think we're all here, with a mutual goal of strengthening our community, and then being open to having our community influence the wider world in powerful ways. And so some of this stuff's introspective and saying, how do we get ourselves together to do that as well as possible? And if we're willing to acknowledge that what got us here won't get us there, that just requires a certain degree of openness. So try to hear everything with an open ear, an open mind. And I say that mostly for my own reminder. We did a bunch of outreach interviews, conversations, and on-site visits. Adichie wins the farthest distance award for the trip to Brazil. We did an initial check-in with Ed in early September to sort of allow him to see what our early findings were. And then through the fall and into this year, we synthesized those findings and recommendations with Ed. We had a conversation around overall organization, the behavioral shift, that this isn't really sort of moving boxes around on an org chart. It's all of us. It's the staff, it's the parish, it's communicating across the community, it's prospective members. How does that all come together in an ecosystem, and how do we become extremely intentional about that? So hopefully we can share and provide some illumination around that. And how does that impact our CYF, the role that we're recruiting for, and then a Congregational Development Director. So we're just going to dive right into our outreach stories, and we're going to start with Marianne.
So we thought it'd be interesting not only to look at parishes that are our size, but maybe a smaller parish such as Holy Nativity Episcopal Church, and Peter Root is the rector there. He came to this church. It's a small church in a neighborhood in Westchester, probably one of the only, or one of the few growing parishes in the diocese. And when he got there, he had about 30 members in the congregation each Sunday, and now over 100 each Sunday. And he believes it's in large part to doing some bold, creative ways of creating community, because they really believe in Phyllis Tickle's community of belonging, not necessarily believers. So he's done some pretty radical things. He thinks Jesus was a big risk taker. He's very comfortable with making mistakes and what's learned from those. So they did a very bold thing by ripping up all the grass, and they're on a corner lot. They ripped up the grass and put in this community garden that everything they grow goes to the LA Food Pantry. And through this, there's all sorts of people, neighborhood people that'll probably never step foot inside the actual church, but are becoming members of the community. And one of their most faithful gardeners every week is a Jewish neighbor who, she believes she's part of the community, even though she's not a worshiping member. And so there are many people like that. Their parish hall is called the community hall because so many different community groups use that, like All Saints. They have a local artist. His artwork is up there in the corner. That's an image that's in the church, but all of his artwork hangs in the parish hall. Food is a very big part of their life at Holy Nativity. Every Sunday people take turns bringing a meal between or after services, and that's definitely a big part of their community. One of the things that he said is that we empower people of shared priesthood, often in very risky ways. People need to feel they belong, share the power, share and proclaim the gospel. And he calls that preaching from the pulpits of their lives. So some of the things that they've done might not make a whole lot of sense, but it turned out to be, such as the garden, such a huge community and parish builder. They now have a yoga room at their church. One of the rooms they turned into a yoga studio. And so they have many active classes of yoga each week. And all these are just different ways into the church. And going from 30 members on a Sunday, 30 parishioners on a Sunday, to over 100, a very diverse group. Very exciting things happening at Holy Nativity. And I think that's about and one of the things one of the ways they come about these different things is they just get together in groups, allow ideas to incubate, and then wait for the Holy Spirit to move in new directions. Good conversation.
Nancy.
Marianne and I interviewed Wendy Berry. Wendy, as you remember, was the children's minister at All Saints Church preceding Laura Thornton. And Wendy now is at St. Bartholomew's in New York City. There is a paid staff there of about 15, so it's smaller than All Saints Church. That's Wendy over on your right. Wendy is currently the CYF minister and has responsibility for baptisms, children's education, Christian formation, and new family incorporation. Just the key points when we interviewed her, they do things a little differently at St. Bartholomew's. Every staff member is responsible for intentional points of entry for new congregants. So she has been assigned new family incorporation. She's responsible for that. But to help her with that job and to help the other staff with that job, they have a director of communications who meets with the staff regularly, and she says almost weekly, and we'll sit down with them and talk about how can I help you communicate your program message to everybody. Also, another key thing that she says that helps with Bartholomew's too is they don't have a lot of preconceived ideas about how things should work, and they don't believe in like everything has to be excellent from the get-go. They're really willing to try things on and see how it goes and see if it works without preconceived ideas, and then move on. Dump it if it doesn't work. Move on. She also said that as a person with small children, she really appreciates the flexibility in her schedule at St. Bartholomew's. She's allowed to come and go and has some flexibility with the time if she has things to do with her child's school or in the evening. Okay.
So Mel.
All right, as you can see from the slide, this is a talk about social media. I think Charlie put that up there because in December we put up a Facebook page for the Taizé community here at All Saints, and put up some of the logos and graphics from that page. And so as I talk about social media, he thought this would be appropriate since we're sort of putting this into action now. When I'm talking about social media in regards to the things we were studying this last year, predominantly I'm talking about Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. There are many other technological services out there, Pinterest and so on and so forth, but those are the ones that we were looking at mostly. The benefits of the social media approach to reaching out to people are rather extensive, and the fact that probably most people here at least have an account, if you don't check on it every few moments like Susan might be doing right now. Shows that you do have an ability to get out to people very inexpensively. As we all saw with email blasts and how it has affected the postal service. Same thing with social media affecting communications. It's inexpensive. There's an immediacy of communication. It is pennies on the dollar in comparison to print advertising and other forms of communication that we typically use. I think we even had a discussion about this at a meeting a couple of weeks ago when we were advertising Brother Emil's visit from Taizé, France, and we used Facebook advertising to do it, and for $6 I hit tens of thousands of eyeballs out there, which just was phenomenal in terms of outreach. It's contemporary, it hits folks in a way that says we're not stodgy or preachy, that we're interactive with them, and that we have the ability to, on a personal level, ourselves, share our interests, causes, and concerns. I mean, I'm sitting there looking at, for example, Monica Hubbard's various interests and going, wow, she's really involved in the community and all these different things. I didn't realize there was this stuff going on. I should check with her to see what's possible for my involvement in some of the things she does. And actually, it's also used quite often in church shopping. Several people I met during the coffee hour, Newcomers Coffee, several mentioned that they found All Saints from online sources and watched us from streaming first before coming to All Saints. So the streaming, the Facebook, and all of that is effective in drawing people in. And the effective use of social media is based on a couple of things, and I just want to bring up a couple of these items. It's got to be intentional, and you have to know what the goals are. You just can't, like a lot of folks did in the early 2000s or late 90s, slap up a web page and say, I did what I needed to do. It's something that has to be done on a very regular basis, and you have to know why you're doing it. So the intentionality has to be there, and there has to be planning on making sure that the content and the message is fresh and consistent. It's got to have multi-level support from from the congregation, from the staff, from all age ranges. It's sort of my little thing that every time I look at our wonderful YouTube channel, that aren't very many examples of children on it. And our youth are just so amazing, and it just it really would be awesome if we had our youth ministering to other youth in the community. And of course, making sure that the resources to have social media are available to as many people as possible. There are a few questions as I wrap up. What about Spanish? What about other languages? How do we reach out to folks who don't speak primarily in English? And coordination of the ministry pages. How do we monitor them, make sure that they're a safe place for us to all talk and communicate and be on message? And lastly, it comes down to making sure that we understand that social media isn't the answer. It's not the only way to reach out to people. It's just an additional way that will allow us to reach people that otherwise might just label themselves as spiritual but not religious and think that that somehow suffices. And if we can attract their eyeballs, attract their attention, and show them that there might be more, that role is where social media might be most effective.
And you know what, quickly, Mel and I worked on that a little bit together. I used social media to reach out to a friend of mine whose name is Trevor Yeager, who started in Indianapolis a social media analysis company called Trendy Minds. So I reached out to him on Facebook, and he got right back to me, and this is what he said. Successful businesses have realized the importance of implementing quality customer, there's that word again, we'll say constituents, engagement practices. There's that word too, engagement. With the advancements in technology, businesses now have instant access to current and prospective parishioners. He says customers. From social media channels to marketing automation tools, businesses must leverage, and this is the key for us, I think, businesses must leverage any available resources to attract, engage, and retain clients, including Facebook and Twitter.
I interviewed Don Miller, so my story is a little different in that it wasn't a story about what somebody did somewhere or how it's organized. But I talked with him about growing churches and also attracting younger people, 20s and 30s. And so he gave me his responses from the perspective of the Catholic, Charismatic, and Pentecostal churches that he's been studying for the last several years. And they are attracting 20s and 30s to their congregations, and they're growing. It's kind of interesting, a trite phrase, the medium is his message, is one of the things that he said about All Saints. Our theology is attractive, but how we deliver it is not necessarily attractive, particularly to the younger demographic. Music is a point of entry, a point of attraction, and our music is not contemporary. And one of the things, it's stated very bluntly, But he wasn't saying that All Saints should reinvent itself and do a total makeover, but think about some changes along the lines of back in the 70s when the evening rock masses were done. Those attracted a lot of young people. My husband, who resisted for a long time coming to All Saints because it is so different from his Presbyterian roots, talks about when he was in college going to All Saints to the rock masses. And of course now he's been converted to the way we do music. And then the other thing that we talked about was the large megachurches who have small staffs, have people who are very engaged, and they have a cell structure. At All Saints, the point of connection and engagement for many of us is being on a committee together. When we work together, we form bonds and we get to know one another. In the megachurches where they've got these cells, people form those bonds in actually doing whatever ministry work that they are engaged in rather than in committee work. And so that's another thought. And it fits with a lot of the things that we've been talking about at All Saints, in that, trying things on, not necessarily making sure that everything is perfect, not letting the perfect get in the way, or not letting the good get in the way of progress. And so the quote there is, loosening the reins could unleash creativity. And that is pretty much the gist of what Don Miller had to say about how we might attract more people to All Saints Church.
In order to save time, I'm not going to read what's on the screen, all right? Last June, when Reverend Ed asked me to join the Best Practices Committee, I wonder what I have to offer to deserve such an honor. I emailed back to him saying that I was going to Brazil for 1 month between July and August. And if it still needed my help after my return, I would be glad to do so. However, I thought that by the time I came back, the committee would have finished work. That was before. Little did I know that 9 months later, we would still be working on this project. While visiting a childhood friend of mine in São Paulo, who had been a member of my father's church 56 years ago, she mentioned in awe the works of Reverend Aldo Pintão at the cathedral. She told me that when he became the dean in 2007, there were about 2 people worshiping on Sundays. However, today there are 1,500 members at the church. She also mentioned the 3 daycare centers he founded and what a great service they're providing for the children and their parents who live in the poorest communities of São Paulo. One of them is Paraisópolis, which was considered the most violent favela, shantytown in São Paulo 3 years ago. It is located right next to Morumbi, one of the wealthiest communities in São Paulo. I thought then that I had to meet Reverendo Aldo personally and visit daycare centers. I thought to myself, this was going to be my assignment as a member of the Best Practices Committee. It was one of those divine interventions, moment that has happened to me all my life. Whenever I needed help, help appears somewhere. My friend gave me Reverend Aldo's phone number, and I called him the next day, which was a Monday. I talked to him for 15 minutes.
Put the microphone
I talked to him. I talked to him for 15 minutes and asked if I could visit the daycare centers. He suggested I attend the Wednesday evening group prayer at the cathedral, and he offered the church driver to take me to the daycare centers on Thursday. There were 200 members in attendance at Wednesday evening prayer. I was surprised by the number because the traffic gridlock in the evening is horrendous in São Paulo. Although the church has 1,500 parishioners, Reverend Aldo knows a small number well. During the prayer group, he mentioned to the congregation the names of 2 members in attendance and how he connected one who was having health problems with the other who is a musician. Subsequently, that member underwent surgery, and Reverend Aldo was glad that she was back in church. I was warmly welcomed by Reverend Aldo during the service. It was his 50th birthday, and the congregation celebrated it by showing video of his accomplishments. Cake was served after the service. He had asked the members to not give him personal gift, but if they insist on a gift, he asked that they would consider food and school materials for the daycare centers. The 3 daycare centers are under the Anglican Institute, a social arm of Cathedral. The next day, I saw the church driver loading the gifts on the back of the pickup to store in a building behind the church. The administrative corporation of the Anglican Institute is centralized at Cathedral. Reverend Aldo is the only minister at the Cathedral and has a staff of 6 people. His wife, Ana Paula, is the top administrator. I spoke to her and a member of the Vestry for 45 minutes before the service. She was sitting in front of the computer, and whenever I asked a number of questions, she looked up on the computer. She was a dentist before she married Reverend Aldo, and they have a son. I'm so sorry, I'm missing a page. Okay, so he started, the church started growing when he started performing weddings. The couples who were Catholic and Jewish, they cannot, if they are divorced, they cannot marry in the Catholic Church or the Jewish temples. So that's how he started bringing members in the church. He performs 30 weddings a month on Fridays, Saturdays, and the day before holidays. Brazil has lots of holidays. And the waiting list is 1 year. And he's very popular among the Brazilian celebrities and makes extensive use of the media. People call him the wedding minister. The only requirement for prospective couples is to attend 10 Sunday services before the wedding. He wants them to get to know the church. These weddings bring most of the church's revenues, and they are used primarily to pay the expenses of the daycare centers. During our trip to the daycare centers, which are located far apart, the driver told me that when he was unemployed, he went to the church to ask for food. The devil also told him that he would give him something better than food. He would give him a job as the driver of the church. He has been working for the church for the last 10 years. He also told me that when Reverend Aldo visits Paraisópolis, nobody threatens him, not even the drug dealers. Now, I'm going to talk about something else a little bit. It's about the Best Practice Committee. As I mentioned before, our Best Practice Committee has been meeting for the last 9 months. Discernment has been a big part of our meetings. I have been very moved by the serious commitment of our members in trying to find the best ways to move all saints forward. We had a meeting this past Tuesday, and Charlie was in Washington, D.C. for a professional meeting on Monday. He was supposed to have attended a meeting at the White House on Tuesday morning. But he gave, because he's the leader, one of the leaders of our group of Best Practices Committee, he flew back instead to be with us that evening. And then Gertie was in Hawaii for a professional meeting, but she called us up on time to participate in the meeting. Tim fought a traffic jam all the way from the west side of town to come to the meeting during the rush hour. I can go on and on about all the members who have been making sacrifices to come to these meetings because of their love for our church and community. And all this is for the staff of All Saints. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the staff of All Saints Church for the hard work and the long hours that you have contributed during this time of transition. We all appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Okay, cover your left eye. So this is Robert Weber. I don't know if you're familiar with Weber, but he's at Wheaton, and it's called Northwest Seminary there, Northern Seminary. Anyway, he did a massive survey of younger evangelicals who now are in their 30s. This was 10 years ago. But Weber's findings are fascinating to me, and especially as they relate to who we are, because what he describes as who I'll remind you that we have a rector who describes himself as an evangelical Episcopalian. Am I right? So we can redefine that word as we understand it, and as the New Testament does as well. So it doesn't have to necessarily mean a subcultured niche of Christianity that loves rock and roll for Jesus, and as Jenny calls it, G's Act. Anyway, there is probably not any way for you to read what the chart says, so I'm going to point out a few things. The column under traditional evangelicals, that's 1950 to 1975. And I'll just, for reference, I was born in 1973.
Quit bragging.
Yeah. I thought I was saying how old I am. A little humor. Come on, everybody. So, if you have time, we can make sure that you will have access to this. I want you to spend some time looking through it, because you will see the transition of what the church is becoming, and it's always been he's covering one eye. It's always been in this evolution, and some of the things that stand out that we should be paying attention to is young people who are in their 20s and 30s. They are definitely, their cultural situation is that they've got a postmodern worldview. And that they have been raised in an internet society. I was not. I was finishing grad school before I started really emailing people. But that's, they've moved on from email. Email, like if you get an email, it's from your grandma as far as the person. I'm just telling you what, those of you that work with...
Ages!
Hey, this is a moment about honesty, and I'm just preaching, all right? Yeah, well, there's some shaming going on here. Also, their generation is one of deconstruction. They've seen a deconstruction of society, a social deconstruction, an economic deconstruction, and and they're interested in reconstruction. And those are the questions that we're asking these 2 days. And what we're trying to live out. Their attitude toward history is that they want to draw from the wisdom of the past, and A few years ago when I was working regularly with college students, all these kids that were coming out of evangelical churches, they asked if we would do some kind of a liturgical service. And they were very hungry for the kind of thing that is a day-to-day thing for we at All Saints. And they understand the road to the future runs through the past. Their theological commitment is of Christianity as a community of faith. I mean, they're talking about the things that Irenaeus and Tertullian were talking about. Who we are, how we stand out in society, by who we serve and who we love. And that should be everybody. In the 4th and 5th century, the only place where people could get access to health care was in Christian communities. I would say that that's a big part of our identity. That's what we embody, and the ministries that have grown out of our parish are very much in line with that and continue to percolate. So I'll just, a couple other things here. Authentic embodiment, and this sort of points, Ray has something to pass out for me. For young people, I don't know what you would say is the word to describe the rock and roll, because rock and roll is not something that young people, it is old. It is old. It is. And, I even say to people, rock on, And a great question I heard recently in a meeting was, hey, what have you done for rock and roll lately? And that is something that young people don't connect with necessarily, because one of the things that made rock and roll was inaccessibility. And what young people value today is authenticity and accessibility and purpose and relevance, and not just authenticity, but authentic connection. And these, I think, are values that we hold. And so just Ray's passing that around, I'm going to read this, but we have a massive opportunity and this is, every angle that we've come at this is where we have landed, is the opportunity that we have. Like natural competencies that we have at All Saints that we do all the time, but maybe we haven't thought strategically about how to utilize them in a culture that's looking for these kind of things. So the great quote from yesterday, what got us here will not get us there. And this is something from Merritt's Institute. Then I will relinquish the microphone. The traditional business beliefs that brought success in the past will not bring success in the future. Whether you call today's business environment the new normal, the not normal, or just plain unsettling, you know the old ways aren't working. People are skeptical about their relationships with business, and I would add the church. Whether they are customers, sales partners, employees, or parishioners, all are looking for relationships with organizations they can trust, organizations that care, organizations that align with their values. Yet the search is arduous and difficult. Too often the real story is that businesses view people as a means to their profit end, and this is what's key for me here, rather than as stakeholders in creating shared value. You can spend some time on that.
Thank you. Jerry.
I need my slide.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. I spoke to two actual congregational development people from two different churches. Up in the top, there is Christopher Harris from the St. Paul's Cathedral in San Diego. And the young lady at the bottom is Katie Bonjoviani, who is the volunteer. She's the coordinator for membership and volunteers at Trinity Church in Boston. I was going to be in Boston to visit my daughter, so I took the opportunity to meet her. Both of these folks I spent 3 hours with. They were so happy to have somebody who was interested in their job. And so they gave me 3 hours of their time, both of them. I want to talk about Katie at Trinity first. She is She was hired when they had a realization that they needed to have a connecting point for newcomers and for volunteers, and that they didn't have it, and that it did not need to be an ordained minister. So she works to better connect newcomers and the older members from the outside of the church to the inside. That is her charge. And she then helps to keep them and stay energized, especially people who are moving from ministries that may have been in the church for a while. She considers it part of her job to keep them energized as they move from one ministry to another, whatever's interesting to them at that time. She also, and I thought this was really great, she also helps to find and to match leadership with the ministries. It is her job to really, if a ministry leader is burned out and wants to move on to something different, she will work with the ministry to find leadership for that ministry. She's the very first person who comes in contact with newcomers. She keeps the database herself, and she flags any newcomer for all future newcomer activities. She's really intentional with everyone who comes to that church. She reaches out to them every 6 months in some way. One of the ways she reaches out to them, I think, is really nice. The beautiful sort of living room down there on the lower right-hand corner is a location where she holds a wine and cheese reception quarterly with everyone who is with the rector and the priest and everyone who has come to the church who is a newcomer. She gathers them together to be in closer contact to the staff, and so the staff knows them. Once people are into some kind of engagement with the church, she continues to work with them to get to their next step. If they're a newcomer, they've been to the coffee or they've been to the wine and cheese reception, she helps them discern. She's the person that they can go to who helps them discern where they might be, where the Spirit might be leading them to work in the church. And I would say also that their ministries are very, very different from ours. They have no staff affiliated with any of their ministries. All of their ministries are the church in coordination with local nonprofit agencies. So she basically places people in leadership roles or in volunteer roles in local Boston volunteer opportunities through the nonprofits, and they don't really have any ministries, at Trinity that are run by staff. So, and then I thought it was really interesting, she also creates a quarterly newcomers report for the Vestry, showing who has come in and just how she has shepherded the newcomers through the system. They don't have any programs on Sundays. It's only fellowship at Trinity. Wednesdays are adult education, which follows a meal, a community meal, and the community meal follows a children's concert every Wednesday. So, and that's how they do it at Trinity. Christopher Harris from St. Paul's Cathedral in San Diego is a very dynamic young man. He came to Scott Richardson. He was an attorney. Came to Scott Richardson, who some of us know in this room, and he was so interested in what was going on and had so many ideas that Scott talked to. What sounds like they discerned together that he should probably give up his legal career and come and work at the church. So he is still there. He's been there 6 years, and their weekly average attendance has gone from 520 to 635 in those 5 years, in those 6 years. So when I asked him what the reasons were for why he thought their membership was increasing, and they have a really exponential increasing attendance at their programs as well. Above all, he says, we become inviting. That word is really key to the way he does business at St. Paul's. That means, and these are his words, it means calling people and inviting them personally. He said, when there was a lack of enrollment, we kept inviting people. We'd put the word out in our bulletin, or we'd announce it, from the pulpit. But once I started making personal invitations through email and then through a personal phone call, our attendance increased. It started to increase, and in one case it went from, I think, 50 people in their equivalent of our 101 class to 90 people. And he just, he saw this soar in attendance, and he says, this is a quote directly from him, "Personal communications and inviting is the glue. People may come initially for a program or a speech, but eventually they're not coming just for programs. We have to ask them, what is going on with you, instead of just talking to them." He considers stewardship a part of formation, and he thinks that parishioners grow as their growth as a Christian tracks their growth or their generosity as a Christian. That formation should come before the ask for generosity. And in conclusion, he pretty much boils everything down to three concepts. First, you welcome. And when you welcome, you listen more than you tell. And then you invite. And you do that personally and intentionally and often. And finally, you connect. You provide engagement for the newcomer, the person who is coming into your midst. And once they're engaged, then you can start working on the other things like pledging and what have you. So, and when I asked him about the difference of his ideas about the public parish church and how they handle that, he said to me, "Be who you are. This attracts people." He said, "If you're known for bold statements, people get excited about the church. But it needs to be a both and. Figure out a way to be there for the parishioner as well. Welcome is the most important, but what is next, once folks are welcomed, is how you build a relationship with them. See where the Spirit is working in their life and be supportive to that."
Thanks, Jerry. This on?
Is that it?
Yep. Trula couldn't be here. Trula couldn't be here, but she did some outreach to Glide up in San Francisco from the Methodist tradition, and they really put out this message of radical inclusion, right up front. Radically inclusive, just, and loving community mobilized to alleviate suffering and break the cycles of poverty and marginalization. I mean, this is sort of the driving force. In addition to be a place where people are fed spiritually, they sort of, in that sort of Franciscan tradition of preaching the gospel always and when necessary use words, are really action driven. 835,000 meals served in the latest fiscal year. So I think something that manifests the power of action and involvement and the real alleviation of suffering. And then finally, I spoke with David Norgard, who is familiar to many of us and is certainly familiar with All Saints. And David also has quite a bit of exposure with St. Paul's down in San Diego. So I'm going to rip through what I think the headlines are, and from my conversation with David. He characterized the most accurate assessment of people looking for a church and or attending a church is to achieve a sense of belonging with a sense of community and connection. He describes a parishioner life cycle, which I think is, we can all relate to, and, he does, has a profession of working with churches and understanding this, and that life cycle looks like invitation, welcome, incorporation, and then the place where most of us spend, the rest of our lives in a sustaining and recommitting, part of that. And it's in that sustaining and recommitting part of our life cycle where there needs to be this ongoing intentional connection through activity, through work, through worship, through spiritual development, all of those things that we call formation. So David really called that out for us. Churches that grow are very deliberate. This is not something that happens by accident. Have to be committed to connecting people. Someone and everyone on the team focused on making those connections. And the way he described that is, we shouldn't think of a congregational development person as, that's the person that's going to connect all of us and the switchboard through which the world runs. It's almost like we should think of that type of role as a catalyst, somebody who enters into lots of different relationships and changed in those relationships, probably enriched, but it's about helping to make those happen. How do we connect a staff team with members, with prospective members, with members of the community, and that this very webby kind of experience. It's a system for building relationships. Again, not the sort of messy human kind of, banging around that we all are just part of because we're human. But very intentionally saying, how are we going? What's our relationship building system? A very savvy and planned out, intentional system for that. And that's not. And he was very, cautioning. That's not to make it this artificial thing, because this has to be deeply felt and truly authentic in our desire to achieve that. A fact, he pointed out, people must know other people to say hello and engage with, whether that's on the lawn, in the pews, at a meeting, in order to stay. If that's not happening in the first 6 months of somebody's visit and connection, then the likelihood that they are around for that sustaining and recommitting portion of the life cycle is not going to be there. Corporate or public churches are very susceptible to program versus personal bias, and that's very dangerous to those churches as a parish, right? And it's not. That's not to place a relative worth on one or the other. It's the most both andness of what we are doing. Must be diligent. This is a direct quote. Must be diligent to maintain the personal with the importance of belonging at all phases of engagement. Certainly, being a public church is a great strength in the inviting and welcoming phase. And we have to realize that in that incorporating and sustaining phase, that the emphasis turns deeply personal. Pretty obvious stuff here. Practical ways for continuous connection, we have to think of those. It's difficult. You think about 1,200 families that are engaged in some way with the parish. That manifests itself in 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 people. But we really have to figure out what are those practical ways that we can engage with one another. He really put a name on something that was powerful to me, and this is another direct quote. There's a fulcrum point from incorporation to the sustaining phase in life cycles, that both the church and that person or that prospective member recognize when they come to belong or connect. And he shared that it wasn't so obvious at All Saints. Does that point happen when somebody pledges? Does it happen, when somebody goes through All Saints 101 and they attend the newcomer service or the new member service? Is it upon the registration of their baptism? When somebody knows you on the lawn, is there a letter that goes out? So I thought that was a very good specific thing for us to be conscious about. He shared it's not magic, it's divine, but we must be authentically, widely, and consistently applying these principles for connecting with people. And that it really needs to become an operating system. One person, if it's the director of congregational development, working across our staff team, working across our lay leadership team, and then the wider parish, and doing that in a very consistent manner. Another direct quote, it's a willingness to plan the details, to practice those details. I think there's an awful lot of planning that happens, and then we get straight to execution. But really practice, and I really heard the echoes of James Lawson in that practice phase. Execute, with an emphasis on not getting bored with that execution, that we need to sort of maintain that enthusiasm of beginners, which is easier to preach than do. do it with real warmth and keep it very real. So I thought that was a good takeaway there. Not just a theory, it delivers measurable results and real growth net of attrition. And it must be top of mind for everybody on the staff team, everybody in the lay leadership, everybody, and across the entire parish. So I think one of the challenges in really turning this on is how do we take this beyond this meeting, beyond our staff team, beyond the vestry, and communicate with the parish, and that we want to do this intentionally, and it's going to be a community effort. Plans drive the focus and priorities. How we organize our staff, how we budget and prioritize the application of our resources, and how do we develop volunteers. Someone on the staff holds this role for the staff members, this role that we're talking about as the Director of Congregational Development, and that there's consistent communication across our staff team to remind us of our intentionality that this is the way we want to build this operating system. Our entire staff and the membership, the parish, are trained that this is the role that we're all playing on this team, that this is the goal for our interactions. And we had a conversation about St. Paul and using one's talents, and the applications of talents. So is this person, the evangelist? Is this person the person who can organize? And that in business, a lot of times it's said getting kids to the right seats on the bus is the hardest thing of all. But critically fitting staff talents with the roles where they can excel. That Gallup concept of soaring with your strengths. So that was an interesting aside. This intentional process for volunteers, recruiting them, training them so we don't throw kids into the middle of the pool, supervising, acknowledging and recognizing, certainly sort of holding people up as they accomplish things, and then rotating and retiring. And that rotation and retiring process should be seen as the opportunity. The well-pruned tree grows well. And that we're bringing in, additional people into the center. And really critical, he closed with this critical emphasis on catalyzing and facilitating inter-parishioner communication. I know the depth of feelings I have for everybody in this room as I've gotten to work closely with you and know people better, and certainly this team as we've spent a lot of time together. And I think it's our responsibility in these leadership roles, how do we mass produce that to some extent? And to the extent that we do, I think we'll have a stronger community. And there is an innate human attractiveness in that. People who are visitors will see that and know that about us without us speaking explicitly about us. It's this human ability to know that innately. Talking about he shared a story of a friend trying to find out something about our Acolyte program and the difficulty in just finding the phone number for the person to connect with. So we talked about something as simple. Do we come up with an opt-in only, directory that sits on the website? Again, this idea of communication and just getting connected, a very simple example. He shared that at St. Paul's Cathedral down in San Diego, each person received a call at least 3 times annually. We've certainly tried this with call to community, the Vestry thank you calls, around stewardship, prayer requests, 24 hours, all those. I think he just really emphasized the need for facilitating this for me. So that is David Norgard. So run into key findings, which I doubt by this point will be any kind of surprise. These are the elements that we divined out of all of our outreach that will provide for a membership that's deeply rooted, committed, and engaged. The sense of belonging, that people are in this community, we want them to both belong to the church and we need to make certain that they're feeling that sense of belonging. Genuine engagement, defined as mobilized in ministry. What is it that people can go and participate in and find that enrichment, deepen, their spiritual experience, find out things, that they hadn't thought about, and actively participate, similar to what Glide does, right? It's very, worldly action. deeply felt relational community among staff members, the staff, and prospective members. You know, this idea of this web of connections and you know, enabling that. Authentic connectedness. David also made this observation about, you know, our church is a hierarchical church. And we don't want to slip into this permission-based, you know, type behavior. And when you don't, there is certainly the opportunity, you know, in experimentation, that things can get a little messy. And that's just sort of a natural part of it. Again, a lot of this stuff is stunningly obvious. And then the last, you know, point is that I think we really need to see this as all of us and from different constituents having critical roles and defining, you know, those roles and actively communicating across those roles. And then saying from this day forward, we're going to be very, you know, and not to imply that from this day backward we haven't been, but to sort of reaffirm this idea of really connecting, you know, across our team, or across our community, staff members and parishioners. So we're going to go to the panel again and talk about some of the synthesis and specific recommendations for some of these subjects. Gary?
Well, Charlie assigned me the public church and the parish church.
We jointly landed there.
Yeah. And I was really energized around this idea when I started asking this question of my interviewees. I thought it gave a name to something that was in our parish, and we think about, we try to describe it, and this just says it. This just says it, the parish church and the public church. So of course, just to recap, the public church, we all know, historically rooted, focused on the outside world, and we work to bring our values into the broad public arena. And we do a brilliant job of this. And I think yesterday was a perfect example of how good we are at the public church. The parish church is, for me, and I'm sure this is a little bit different for everybody, but for me, it's the beautiful worship service, it's the amazing music, and it's the relationships I have with everyone on this panel and everyone in this room and all the people I work with at All Saints. It's pastoral care that we give each other and that the church provides for each member. It's our children. It is really, I think, has a lot to do with our children and supporting each other in times of need, which my friends here at church do very nicely for me. And I think it's also helping each other. I always say Jeanette Miyamoto was my volunteer coordinator when I came to All Saints, and she really helped me find my way at All Saints by getting me involved. I think it's important to remember that people come to us often because of the public church. They come because they're interested in the topics of the public church, but they stay with us when they find a community. And I'm fully aware that that community may very well be, and in many cases is, the work of the public church. So they are, we need to be mindful of both. And in conclusion, I think that these two areas of the church work together in a symbiotic process. And I think we need to be mindful to keep our attention to the parish and the public balanced. And it's critical to sustaining our relational engagement for a healthy and growing church.
So as you all know, there's been a search for the CYF director, and it's really additionally Christian formation, so it's a cradle to grave faith formation position. And this person, we felt the following things are really necessary, that this person would be able to advocate for children, especially because they don't have the same voice adults do. And so they really need to understand children and family needs and advocate those needs to the community and to the programs at All Saints. We felt it was important, since the Eucharist is the center of our life, that this person be a priest, to be a part of that Eucharistic life at All Saints. And obviously, a person who has a collaborative work style and to work with strong, committed staff members and parishioners. Be a strong person and a person who's flexible to develop programs and innovative solutions to complex problems.
Okay. How are you doing? What's your energy level like? Are you still engaged? Okay. Just had to ask. A lot of information. Okay, here's some more recurring themes. And I have to say that I enjoy doing the both formal and informal interviews with across the CYF team in this process. And I have to say, between the formal and informal, I felt there was a greater degree of success or going deeper when I applied them with cocktails. So if you you're looking for better interview methodology. All members of the All Saints staff, fine news here, recurring theme. All members of the staff must be trained and encouraged to welcome and incorporate new families. And this is not an assumption that there's no assumption this isn't being done. This is asking the question, what could we be doing better? We need to be intentional about our points of entry, especially with respect to children, youth, and families. And I'll say, this has been something we've been working on, and Laura has been spearheading for a couple of years, and we identified some major needs there and are moving forward and meeting some of those needs. We should staff a director of welcome, inclusion, and incorporation. How many times have we said that already? A collaborative environment must start at the top of the organization. And it's bottom up and it's top down, is what we heard consistently. Encourage integration across departments and offer a cross-disciplinary work environment that includes children and families. Streamline the children, youth, and family research process, Tony's done a fantastic job with this process. It generally takes too long to identify and interview new candidates, and this is such a key position for us. And additionally, I learned that today among our CYF team, and I can say this from anecdotally from my observation, I have seen, from my 12 years of being in All Saints, they are the most collaborative and the most loving working together than I've seen in that team. And we've had great people in my time here. But the level of collaboration and the fact that they enjoy taking meals together and just being people together means a lot about it says a lot about their camaraderie, but also part of it has to do with them being clustered together over in Reeves' house. Just building a family among the staff of children, youth, and families.
Gertie?
I'm going to talk about the congregation development. I figured they could hear me, but I'm going to talk about the congregation development person that we've talked about. And Charlie mentioned a number of things that are really important, so I'm not going to elaborate on those so much, but I have viewed this person as the cheerleader as opposed to the person who's going to do it all. But for those of you who may not have had an opportunity to see the job description that was sent out, I do want to quickly go over for you the things that this person is going to be responsible for. And I think what you need to remember is this person's going to be responsible for making it happen. They're not going to do it all themselves. They're going to be the cheerleader, get everybody on board. Inviting and welcoming new members, engaging and tracking members, training, retention, nourishing, and rotation of parish leadership, analyzing trends in parish church life and national life, small groups ministries, parish life ministries and activities. They're going to also be involved with the stewardship and other development and grant writing activities, vocational discernment and life skills offerings for members, identifying, training, and coordinating volunteers. So that is a huge portfolio, but I think at All Saints we have a track record of all of our staff having huge portfolios. And I think the really important thing to remember is that we are all going to have to be part of the process and system that this person sets up.
Sort of punctuate the social media. Yeah, just the ability of social media to.
Tim, would you stand? It occurs to me that people in the back cannot see any of you on the panel. Would you just mind standing to talk? Or, I'm sorry, Mel. Tim, you stand while Mel talks.
As we wrap up, the social media aspects of everything we've talked about, as I mentioned earlier, are not central. They're not the focal point. They're a tool. And when we talk about YouTube, when we talk about Facebook and Twitter, the idea is to deepen the relationships, to make the communications more meaningful and immediate. And of course, to make sure that as we bring new generations in, that the fact that they think email is for Nana and not for them. And you don't have to be Nana to be afraid of Facebook or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of people who are afraid of Twitter and Facebook. And I'm looking at some of the new things going, oh, geez, are you kidding? I don't want to do that. And well, I wasn't lucky enough to be born in the 70s, but there was this movie called Star Wars. Did you ever see it? Okay, so the point is the social media allows us to, as it evolves and as new technologies come in, to tap into the next generations as they come along and find ways of using that technology to communicate with each other. And so really what we're saying is we want to be on top of ways that people connect to each other, because let's face it, there's more than a couple of people I know in here who've used Skype, for example, to make video phone calls to family members who are far away. And I've been talking to people about, hey, would you like to do a Skype book club or some other ways of communicating and doing connections at All Saints rather than just meeting in Sweetland Hall. So those are the sort of things.
Nancy?
Okay. I don't know if you can even read that, but now we're starting the process. Stand. We need to start the process. How are we going to get this done? We need to actively organize All Saints staff and the church structure to accommodate these changes we're requesting. And how do we do that? So Ed came back from summer, and we presented all this material to Ed, and at that time he presented it back to the staff, and did sort of independent but simultaneous work as a committee. The committee worked on, and the staff worked on independently, identifying all the areas of ministry at All Saints Church. We tried to think of everything we are involved in every ministry and pastoral care efforts. Put them all up on the board, and we put up our new staff descriptions, including congregational development, including the CYF person who now is adult formation, so cradle to grave. And we started to stick up where all these ministries fit in, and I know you can't even read that. It was hilarious the first time we did this, like 90% of the workload ended up in congregational development. But, we're to save the world, and that's, the person. And we realized that's not going to work. We got to reorder it, and we came up with this. It was very interesting. The staff did this independently, and the committee did it independently. delivered it to Ed, and Ed made the final decisions on where it made sense for all these pieces to fit. Because we can't have this structure, this is the part where Scott yesterday said we're dialing now on the desk, we're dialing this. This is what we can change. We have to do this part after do all that visioning in prior months to make the structure to allow us to get this organization to go. Okay. And it's important for the staff to know all their roles and responsibilities because they can't do their job unless they know what they have to do. Is that it?
Yeah, thanks. Now, a very high level conversation about the roadmap for implementation. One thing last year as I was serving as senior warden that I said to Ed right up front, really, I think as a junior warden, I think it's very important as part of the governance leadership of any organization, whether it's a private company as a board member, a nonprofit as a board member, or here at the Vestry at All Saints, is to understand where that line between you as a leader in governance is along with the actual operations of the business itself. I mean, there's inherent conflict in it in that you can't really measure what you manage, and this is a very different organization than some of those other organizations I talked about. It's important to have that high-level type of governance. And the Vestry hires the rector to build the organization, to minister to the church and build it. And that this is really an advisory role we play. And at the same time, we're also, where we're relying on Ed as the coach, many times as members of the parish, we're players on the field, and participating in receiving pastoral care, giving pastoral care. And I just put that out there to be conscious, around that. I think now the change management and leadership, part of this comes. It will fall to the rector largely, to lead certainly the staff team and catalyze this communication across the parish. He's got a bunch of disciples here, that are actively, ready to happen or make this happen. Effectively communicating our conversation about this, and then how we're going to turn it on across the parish, I think is really, really a critical part of that change management. The key changes, I think, important to stress that we really recommend is the evolution and the elevation of the CYF role from one of the person that runs our after-school programs and childhood religious education to a more full-life formation, familial issues. It's not just about kids, learning about the Bible and Jesus. It's what are the challenges that families experience in the world today, and what's the complexity of that like? What happens, trying to get everybody together to get there on Sunday morning, and have that sort of child-focused, full family-focused, community kind of focus around that role. I thought David Norgard just named this so effectively with someone on our team and everyone needing to participate. It really kind of takes our full commitment, all of us raising our right hand and saying, we're going to participate in this way, and that we really need to be the seeds of, turning this on. This isn't, I don't think we should think about this as a restructure, as Scott was saying, yesterday. It's interesting that he said that, and this was one of my notes, and that we're going to get a fix-it person that can cheerlead us into this existence. It requires a fundamental commitment on each of our parts to say, this is the way we want to be with one another. We went through this excruciating sort of, here's all the stuff we do, here's how we think we can get it together in a way that it works, and that I think we need to really hold that in the front of mind and try to manifest that, and make it very intentional in all that we do, and try to make as many connections across this network to draw people in. So I think that's it. And then really, Ed's leading the implementation. I think he'll remind us that we had all these conversations over the course of 9 months and then an hour and a half together. And then I think that's part of the continuous recommitment. as we're in that sustaining recommitment phase, and I think we can all intentionally manifest this into existence. I mean, it's this gigantic church that we're all part of, that we all gifted as part of our lives to have found, and now it's just how do you make it that much bigger and enriching for people? So that's our little presentation.